I had worn the iron so long that I no longer felt it settle against my face each morning. I felt it only when a woman I did not know reached up in front of my whole court and asked to take it off. But that was later. The morning it began, I stood at the gate of Haville with the mask cold against my cheekbone and my hands folded behind my back like a man waiting to be sentenced. And I watched the western carriage come up the black road through the forge smoke, carrying a bride I had agreed to take without ever seeing her face. 12 years of war lay behind that carriage. 12 years of border burnings and wolves dragged home on litters. Of my hold and the sorrel vale bleeding each other white over a strip of river neither of us could farm. The council of both sides had finally done what grief never let kings do. They had made a peace, and the price of the peace was a marriage. Their daughter to my house, my name over hers, a living bridge of two bodies across a river of the dead. I had not argued. I had not wanted a mate in years, had told myself I would never have one, that the part of me that could was buried under the same ash as everything else I had lost. But I was a king before I was a man, and a king does not let his people keep dying to spare himself a wedding. So I put on the mask, and I went down to the gate to meet her. The mask was iron, dark and close-fitting, covering the left side of my face from brow to jaw. It was not ornament. Under it the skin was not skin anymore. It was the memory of fire, ridged and pale, the map of the night that had ended the man I used to be. I had worn it for 11 years. My council had grown used to it. The pups of the hold thought I had been born in it. The women my advisors had once, long ago, dared to bring before me had all done the same thing when they saw it. Their eyes had gone wide, then careful, then somewhere over my shoulder so they would not have to look. I had stopped noticing. I had made myself stop caring. The Iron King, they called me in the other holds, and they did not mean it kindly, and I had decided long ago that a name meant to wound could be worn like armor too. The carriage stopped. My steward, Bran, an old gray wolf who had served my father before me, stepped forward to open the door. I did not move. I stood with the smoke behind me and the whole assembled court behind that, and I waited to see the bride flinch. She stepped down without taking Bran's offered hand. I remember that first. She did not need to be helped down. She came down onto the black stone of my gate in a traveling cloak the gray-green of her home country, road dust on the hem, her dark hair braided plain and coming loose at the temple from days of riding, and she looked up the length of the courtyard at me. And she did not flinch. She looked at the mask. She looked at it the way you look at a locked door in a house you have come to live in with interest, not fear, already wondering what was behind it and how it opened. She looked at it, and then she looked at my eyes, both of them, the one the iron framed and the one it left bare, and something behind my ribs that had been cold and still for 11 years turned over once, slow, like a great animal shifting in its sleep. I did not have a name for it then. I know now it was my wolf waking. She crossed the courtyard to me. She was not tall. She had to lift her chin to hold my gaze, and she did all the way without letting it drop. "You are King Rossin," she said, not a question. "I am," I said. My voice through the iron always came out lower than I meant it, roughened. Most people took a half-step back from it. She did not. "I am Elowen," she said. "Of the Sorrel Vale, I am told I am to be your wife." "You are told correctly." I heard how cold it sounded even as I said it. I did not know how to be anything but cold anymore. "You may still refuse. The council will tell you otherwise, but I am telling you the truth. If you turn this carriage around tonight, I will not stop you, and I will not let them punish your house for it. A marriage made from a woman dragged into it is no marriage. It is only another kind of war." Behind me, I heard Bran draw a small breath. It was not the sort of thing a king was supposed to say to a peace bride. But I meant it. Whatever I was, I would not be a man who took a woman the way my enemies had once taken from me. Elowen studied me for a long moment. The smoke drifted between us. Somewhere in the hold, a forge hammer rang and went quiet. "I did not ride 9 days to turn around at the gate," she said at last. "My grandmother is buried in the ground your archers salted. Your grandfather's men are buried in ours. I have set the bones of boys younger than me who came home from your river." She said it plainly, without accusation, the way a healer names a wound so it can be closed. "If a wedding stops the next one from dying, then I will marry a man in an iron mask and count it a small price. I did not come here for you, King Rossin. I came here so the counting could stop." I had braced for fear or for the practiced sweetness of a girl who had been schooled to charm me. I had not braced for that. For honesty laid down flat like a blade set on a table between us, edged toward neither of us. Then you and I want the same thing, I said, and we can build a marriage on that if nothing else. We can begin there, she agreed. And then I remember this too, because no one had done it in 11 years. She looked at the iron again, openly, unafraid, and she said, "Will you not take it off, so that I may know the face of the man I am to stand beside?" The court went very still. I had 100 cold answers. I used the coldest. "No," I said. "The mask stays. You will find, Lady Aloan, that most of what you ask of me will be given. This will not. Do not ask it again." I expected the wide eyes then, the careful retreat. Instead, she inclined her head once with a grace that had no hurt in it. "As you wish," she said. "I will not ask again until you would rather I did." Until you would rather I did. I did not understand her then. I turned and led her into the black heart of Haville, and I told myself she was a treaty in a gray-green cloak and nothing more, and I did not let myself feel the thing behind my ribs that had turned over and would not go back to sleep. We were married 3 days later in the great hall before both courts, under 100 cold iron sconces that had not held a single flame of celebration in a decade. I wore black and the mask. She wore the pale silver of a bride and a plain circlet, and she stood beside me at the height of the hall with her spine straight and her hands steady, while two peoples who had spent 12 years killing each other watched to see whether this would hold. When the binding was spoken and it came time to seal it, she turned to me and lifted her face, and there was a beat where the whole hall held its breath, because everyone was wondering the same thing. How does a man kiss a bride through iron? He does not. I took her hand instead, both of mine around it, and I bent and pressed my mouth to her knuckles, the way a knight pledges to a queen, and I felt her pulse jump under my lips, quick and warm, and my wolf pushed up hard against the inside of my skin like a hound scenting home. She did not pull her hand away. She turned it in mine so that her fingers closed lightly around my thumb. A small thing, a private thing, hidden in the fold of our joined hands where the court could not see, and she held on. "There," she murmured only for me, "the counting stops today." And the two courts, seeing a king bow over his bride's hand and the bride not flinch, believed the peace and cheered, and it was done. That night I walked her to the door of the chambers that had been prepared for her own chambers, across the corridor from mine, because I would not have her think that a signature on a treaty was a debt she owed me with her body, and at the door she turned. "You did not have to give me my own rooms," she said. "The whole hold will talk." "Let them," I said. "You did not marry a man, you married a peace. I will not make you pay for it in coin you did not offer." She looked up at me for a long moment, and in the low light of the corridor her eyes were not careful and were not afraid. They were something I had no armor against, because I had never learned to armor against it. They were kind. "You keep telling me what I did not do," she said softly. "One day I should like to hear you say what I might if I chose to." And she went in, and closed the door, and left me standing alone in the black corridor with the iron cold against my burning face and my wolf pacing, awake for the first time in 11 years, and refusing to lie back down. I did not sleep that night. I sat by my cold hearth. I had not lit it in years. Fire and I had come to an understanding, which was that I would not look at it, and it would not remind me. And I thought about a woman who had crossed a courtyard toward the thing everyone else fled from, and asked to see my face as though it were a gift and not a horror, and held my thumb in the fold of her hand where no one could see. I had married her to stop the dying. I had not counted on the possibility that she might make me want to live. The thaw came slowly, the way real thaws do, not all at once, but in 100 small breakings loose that you do not notice until one day the river is running that was ice all winter. It began with the wounded. Haville was a hold of iron and forged fire, of hard men and harder wolves, and we had a healer, old Maddock, who was good with the clean breaks and the fevers, but who had buried more of my warriors than he had saved. We were a people who knew how to make wounds and had half forgotten how to close them. That was the 12 years' true cost, not only the dead, but the way the whole hold had grown a scar over its heart, the way I had, and stopped expecting anything to heal. Aloan had been in the hold 4 days when she found the sick house. I did not send her there. I would not have thought to. But she was a healer's daughter and a healer herself, and she had come with 2 chests, and I learned later that only one held her clothes. The other held her mother's craft, dried yarrow and cleavers, willow bark and the good gray clay from the Sorrel riverbank, needle and gut and the small, sharp knives, all the humble tools of keeping people alive. She had brought her real dowry, and it was not silver. I came to the sick house on the 5th day because Bran told me the new queen had not been seen since dawn, and I found her kneeling on the floor beside the pallet of a young wolf named Kor who had taken a spear through the thigh at the last river fight and had been slowly dying of the rot in it ever since. Maddock had told me the leg would have to come off, and the boy would likely die of that too. He had told me to prepare for it. Elowen had the boy's ruined thigh open to the lamplight, and her sleeves pushed to the elbow, and her hands, small, blunt, steady, deep in the work of it. And she was talking to him the whole time in a low, even voice, not about his leg, about the sorrel vale in spring, the way the whole hillside went white with blackthorn, so that his fear had somewhere else to go while her hands did the terrible necessary thing. She did not stop when I came in. She glanced up, marked me, and went back to it. "The rot is not as deep as your Maddock thinks," she said to me without ceremony. "He was cutting toward it from the wrong side. The channel of it runs along the bone. Here, feel." And to my astonishment, I found myself crouched at the pallet, and she guided my hand with hers and pressed my fingers to the hot, hard line of the infection under the boy's skin, and I felt it, the wrongness she meant, running where old Maddock had never thought to look. "He'll keep the leg," she said, "if I have 3 more nights and clean linen and someone to hold him when I burn it out." She looked at me. "Will the king give me that?" Kor was staring up at me with the whole of his young life in his eyes, and I, who had ordered 100 men to their deaths and thought I felt nothing any more, found my throat had closed. "The king will hold him himself," I said. And I did. 3 nights I knelt in that sick house with a spear boy's shoulders braced against my chest, and my arms locked around him while my wife did the slow, bright, cruel work of saving his leg. And each night when it was done she cleaned her hands and looked at me across the sleeping boy. And each night the thing behind my ribs turned over again and stayed a little more awake. Kor kept the leg. He walks on it still. He named his first son for me, which is a strange thing for a man to write, that a spear boy would want his son to carry the name of the Iron King who kept the border burning that put the spear in his leg in the first place. But that is what she did to Havil. She came into a hold that had learned to expect death, and she made it, patient wound by patient wound, start expecting to live. The wounded were the beginning, then it was the wolves. My own wolf had been silent for 11 years. Not gone, a man does not lose his wolf and remain a man, but silent, sunk down deep and cold the way I was cold. Since the night of the fire I had shifted only when I had to, and when I did it was into a great gray beast that ran the ridges alone and answered to no one, not even fully to me. My wolf had grieved the way I had, by going still and staying still and refusing to feel the thing that had happened, because to feel it was to break. Elowen woke it. She did not mean to at first. She had a habit of walking the hold's high wall in the last light, when the forge fires banked and the black stone went almost violet in the dusk. And one evening my wolf, prowling the ridge above the hold as it did most nights, came to the wall's edge and found her there and stopped. She did not run. Of course she did not. I should have known by then that running was a thing other people did. She stood very still with her cloak pulled close, and she looked at the great gray wolf that was her husband, and after a moment she sat down on the cold stone of the wall, unhurried, and she said, "There you are," as though she had been waiting, as though she had known all along that the man in the iron mask had a self he only let out at night on the ridges alone. And my wolf, my silent, frozen, 11 years cold wolf, crossed the space between us and lay down at her feet and put its great heavy head in her lap, and let out a breath it felt as though it had been holding since the fire. I came back to myself on the wall in the gray before dawn with her cloak spread over both of us and her fingers still, even in sleep, wound gently into the fur behind my ear. And I lay there, a king turned beast turned back toward man, in the arms of a woman I had married to stop a war, and I understood with a kind of terror what was happening to me, and I did not have the first idea how to stop it. And this is the truth I had run from for 11 years. I did not want to. After that, the thaw could not be pretended away. I began to find reasons to be where she was. A king has 100 honest reasons to walk his own hold. I used all of them and invented more. I took the evening meal in the hall instead of alone in my chambers, because she took it there, and the hold saw its king at its table for the first time in years, and something eased in Havil that I had not known was clenched. I walked her through the forges and showed her how we drew the black iron ore from the deep seams and made it into blades and hinges and the great cold sconces of the hall. And she listened as though it mattered, and asked questions no one had asked me in a decade. Not what the iron could kill, but what it could hold up, what it could keep out, what it could make that would last. "Everything you make is hard," she observed one evening, turning a horseshoe in her small hands, still warm from the forge. "Is there nothing Havel makes that bends?" "Iron does not bend," I said. "That is the point of it." "Iron bends," she said, "when there is heat enough. You of all men should know that." And she looked very briefly at the mask and did not say the rest and did not need to. She never asked again to see my face. She had told me she would not, until I would rather she did, and she kept her word with a patience that undid me more surely than pressing ever could have. But she made room for it. She never sat on my left, where the iron was, in a way that would force me to turn the ruined side toward her. She came always to my right, so that the man she spoke to was whole. And yet she never treated the left side as a thing to be hidden from either. Once, reaching to take a cup from my hand, her fingers brushed the cold edge of the mask along my jaw, and she did not startle, did not apologize, did not pretend it had not happened. She let it be a part of me she had touched. As though I were simply a man with iron on half his face, and not a horror kept behind it. I do not know how to make you understand what that was after 11 years, to be looked at whole, to be reached toward instead of away from. I had built my life on the certainty that the fire had made me into something no one could bear to see. And here was a woman who bore it as easily as breathing, and it broke me open along a seam I had welded shut so long ago I had forgotten it was a seam at all. One night, it was deep winter by then, the forges roaring day and night against the cold, the hold's first true winter of peace. I found her in the small library that had been my father's, a room I had not entered in years, going through the old books of the two hold's histories. "You are learning your enemies," I said from the doorway. "I am learning my husband," she corrected, not looking up. "There is a difference, though your counsel would not know it." She turned a page. "Havel had a queen once before you. There is a name struck out of every record I can find, as though someone went through this room with a knife. And the year it was struck out is the year they say the Iron King put on his mask." She looked up at me then, and her eyes were very steady and very gentle. "You do not have to tell me, Rawson, but I would rather you told me than that I keep learning it from books that hate you." I had not said it aloud in 11 years. I had not let anyone say it near me. But she had asked me nothing. She had only offered to carry it if I chose to set it down, and I found that I was tired, so tired of carrying it alone. So I told her about Aveline, my first betrothed, the daughter of an old ally, a girl I had loved with the whole reckless heart of a young king who thought the world would go on being kind to him. I told her about the winter feast 11 years ago, when a rival hold that pretended friendship came under our roof as guests, and at midnight set the guest hall alight with my father's court inside it and barred the doors. I told her about the fire. About my father and Aveline, and half the highest blood of Havel dying behind doors I could not break in time. About going in anyway into the flame, and dragging out who I could, which was not enough, which was never going to be enough. About the burning timber that came down across the left of my face and took the skin and the sight in that eye for a year and the man I had been forever. About waking a month later scarred and half-blind and king, my father Ash, my love Ash, and knowing it had happened under my roof, at my table, because I had trusted a smile. "I put on the iron," I said, "because I could not look at my own face and not see the door I did not break in time, and because I swore that no one would ever again get close enough to a king of Havel to do that. The mask keeps the world out. It has kept me alive." I looked at her, this woman sitting in my dead father's library with her enemies' histories open on her knees. "And then they sent me you, and you crossed the courtyard toward it, and I have not had a single night's peace since, because you are the first thing in 11 years that has made me want to open the door I swore to keep shut." The library was very quiet. A log settled in the grate. She had lit the fire. She always lit the fires I had let go cold, and neither of us flinched from it. Aloan set the book aside. She rose, and she came to me, and she did not reach for the mask. She reached instead for my hand, the way she had at the wedding, and she folded it in both of hers. "They took your face and called it your fault," she said. "It was not your fault, Rawson. A man who runs into fire for the ones he loves is not the man who set it. You have spent 11 years serving the sentence of the wrong man." She lifted my hand and pressed it flat against her own cheek, warm and unmasked and unafraid, so that I could feel the living heat of her under my palm. "I am not the fire. I am not the door. I am not the smile that betrayed you. I am the woman who crossed the courtyard, and I am not going anywhere, and one day, not tonight, not until you would rather, You are going to let me see the man behind the iron, and I am going to look at him the way I have looked at every part of you I have been allowed to see. As though he is mine, because he is. I could not speak. 11 years of iron does not come off in a night. But I turned my hand against her cheek so that it cupped her face, and she leaned into the touch of the man half the world could not bear to look at. And my wolf, deep in my chest, lifted its head and did not go cold again. And I knew that whatever I had married her to be, she had become something else entirely. Mine, and the reason the counting had stopped, and the first warm thing in a house of iron in 11 long years. The old enemy did not let the peace lie. I should have expected it. The hold that had burned my father's court had not been party to the truce. They were a third power, the Viharn, a lean, cruel pack out of the northern crags who had grown fat for a decade feeding on the war between Havil and the Sorrel Vale, raiding both sides' weakened borders, selling iron to one and grain to the other, thriving on our bleeding. A peace between us was a knife at their throat. They had let the war do their work for 12 years. They were not about to let a wedding end it. They came in the deep of winter, the way they had come before, cloaked as something they were not. A party rode down to Havil's gate under a green branch of parley. Envoys, they said, come to congratulate the new married holds and offer the Viharn's own friendship. Their leader was a gray-muzzled wolf named Karst, and he had a smile I had seen before at another winter feast, 11 years gone, and my iron-cold blood ran colder still to see it at my gate again. I would have turned them away. Every instinct I had, hard-earned in fire, screamed to bar the doors and put arrows on the wall. But a king newly sworn to peace cannot refuse a parley branch without becoming the thing his enemies say he is, and Karst knew it, and smiled his old smile, and I had no choice but to let the wolf that had burned my father sit at my table. I did not sleep that night or the next. I set my most trusted at every door. I did not let Aloin from my sight. And I watched Karst, and I saw what he was doing, which was the same thing his kind had done before. He was measuring us, counting our warriors, our stores, the temper of the two courts, looking for the seam where the new-welded peace was weakest, so that he could drive a wedge into it and start the profitable killing again. He found the seam he thought he wanted on the third night, at the feast we were bound by custom to give him. He waited until the hall was full and the wine was poured, and then he turned to Aloin, seated at my right in the pale silver she had worn to wed me, and he said, loud enough for both courts to hear, "They tell me, my lady, that you are a healer of rare skill, that you saved a spearboy your husband's own man had given up for dead." He smiled. "How fortunate, then, that you were sent to a hold so very good at making the wounded. Tell me, when your grandmother lay dying of the wound Havil's archers gave her, did you save her too? Or is the king's iron better at breaking things than his bride is at mending them?" The hall went silent. It was a masterful stroke, and I saw it for what it was, a splinter driven straight into the one place the piece could not bear pressure, the fresh grief of a girl who had lost her own blood to my hold's arrows and married the hold anyway. If she flinched, if she wept, if her people saw her sorrow and remembered their dead, the piece would crack along that line, and Karst would have his war back, and his winter's profit with it. I began to rise, iron-cold and murderous, and Aloin's hand came to rest on my arm, light as a bird, and stopped me. She rose herself instead. She stood, small and straight in her bride's silver, and she looked down the length of the hall at Karst of the Viharn with an expression I had never seen on her before. Not the kindness she gave the wounded, not the patience she gave me, but something older and harder underneath both, the steel her gentleness had been sheathing all along. "My grandmother," she said, and her voice carried, clear and level to every corner of the hall, "died of a wound, yes, but not the one you mean. She died of the war. As did your father's men, and this king's father and half the highest blood of two holds, and every spearboy on every pallet in every sick house from the crags to the sea. That is the wound, my lord Karst, the war itself, and I have spent my whole life setting its bones and burning out its rot, and I will tell you what every healer learns in the first year. A wound will not close while there is something in it that wants it kept open." She let that hang. "You have grown rich these 12 years on our open wound. You have sold iron to the ones you sold grain against. You came to my wedding not to bless it, but to reopen it, because a healed border is a poor market for a man who trades in blood." Her chin lifted. "I am a healer, my lord. And I know an infection when it walks into my hall under a green branch and sits at my table and picks at the scar to make it bleed. You are welcome to the king's hospitality tonight. You are welcome to nothing of ours after dawn. Havil and the Sorrel Vale will not be your open wound any longer. We have closed it. and no smiling thing out of the crags will get its fingers into it again. I have led warriors into battle. I have heard men cheer a charge. I have never in my life heard a sound like the one that went up in my hall when my wife sat back down, both courts, Havil and the Sorrel Vale, the old enemies, on their feet as one, roaring, not for a king or a victory, but for a girl in silver who had looked the thing that fed on both of them in the eye and named it, and shamed it, and shut the door on it in front of everyone. Karst's smile was gone. He left before dawn, as she had told him he would, with nothing, no seam, no wedge, no war to sell. The piece did not crack. She had welded it in one speech harder than any treaty ever could. She had given the two courts a thing to be that they could be together, which was a people who would not be preyed upon any more. The Viharn never troubled the border again. There was no market in a wound that would not bleed. That night, after the hall had emptied and the fires had banked, and the two courts had gone to their beds still half drunk on her, I walked alone to her door, as I had every night since our wedding. But at her door she did not go in. She turned and she looked up at me, at the iron and the eye it framed and the eye it left bare, and she said very softly, "Tonight in the hall I told the whole world I had closed the wound. I did not lie, but there is one wound left in this hold I have not been allowed to touch." She reached up slowly, giving me every moment to stop her, the way she had given me every choice since the courtyard, and she laid her fingertips against the cold edge of the iron mask along my cheekbone. "You told me not to ask again," she whispered, "until you would rather I did." Her eyes held mine, both of them, steady and warm and without a trace of fear. "Would you rather, Rawson, because I am asking?" 11 years. 11 years of iron between me and the world. 11 years of the certainty that the fire had made me into a thing no one could bear to see, that the mask was the only mercy I could offer a person's eyes. And a woman standing in a black corridor with her fingers on the metal, asking, not demanding, asking to see the man underneath, and looking at me already before the iron was even off, as though he were hers. I lifted my hands to the straps at the back of my head. My fingers that do not shake shook. And Eloin's hands came up and covered mine, and together, her hands over my hands, we loosed the buckles, one and then the other, and I felt the iron come away from my face for the first time in front of another living soul in 11 years. And I closed my one good eye, and I could not open it. I could not watch her look at what the fire had left. "Rawson," she said, "just my name. Look at me." I opened my eye. She was looking at the ruined side of my face, at the pale ridged map of the burn, the scarred and sightless eye, the jaw the fire had reached. She was looking at all of it, openly, the way she had looked at the locked door of the mask that first day in the courtyard, with interest, and with something that was not pity and was not horror and was not the careful blankness I had braced for every day of my life. She was looking at it the way you look at a country you have come home to. She lifted her hand, and she laid it flat against the scarred side of my face, her warm, living palm against the fire's cold map, and she did not flinch, and she did not weep, and she did not look away. "There he is," she said, exactly as she had said to my wolf on the wall. "There you are," as though she had been waiting all this time for me to come out. "There is the man I married, not the piece, not the iron." Him, her thumb moved gently along the ridge of the scar, learning it, claiming it. "You have been so certain no one could bear to look at you," she said, "that you never once let anyone try. I have wanted to look at you since the courtyard, Rawson, since before I knew your name. Do not ever put it back on for my sake. I did not marry the mask. I married the door and everything behind it, and I have wanted the whole of you from the first day, iron and fire and wolf and all. And I, who had not wept in 11 years, who had ordered men to die with a dry eye and buried a father and a first love behind iron, and told myself I had run out of the thing that weeps. I wept then, the one good eye and the ruined one both, and she gathered my face, all of it, the whole ruined map of it, into her two small, steady healer's hands, and she pressed her mouth to the scar the fire had made, the place I had hidden from the world for a third of my life. And she kissed it as though it were the most cherished thing she had ever been given. "Mine," she whispered against the ruined skin, not a claiming shouted before a court. A vow breathed in a dark corridor only for me. All of you, iron and fire, and every year you carried it alone, mine now and never alone again. I do not wear the mask anymore. I want to be clear about that because it is the truest thing I know how to write. The Iron King of Havil does not hide his face. The hold saw it the next morning. I walked into my own hall for the morning meal with the ruined side bare to the light and my queen on my arm, and I watched them all, my council, and my warriors and the spearboy Kor who kept his leg, look at the fire's map on my face, and I made myself hold still for it, and not one of them flinched. Kor wept, actually, but not from horror. He came and knelt and pressed his forehead to my hand, the burned side, and I understood that they had never needed the mask. I had needed it, and I did not need it anymore, because a woman had crossed a courtyard toward the thing everyone else fled, and reached past the iron, and found me still alive behind it, and refused to look away. The fires burn in Havil now, all of them. The forges, yes, but the hearths too, the ones I let go cold for 11 years, the one in my father's library and the one in my own chambers and the great one in the hall that had not held a celebration flame in a decade. Eloin lit them, one by one, the way she thawed everything else, patiently, without asking permission, simply refusing to let a warm thing stay cold in her house. I can look at fire now. I sit beside it in the evenings with her head on my shoulder, and the flame throwing its light across both sides of my face, the whole and the ruined, and I do not see the door I failed to break. I see the light she brought back into a hold that had forgotten it. She still walks the high wall at dusk. My wolf still finds her there most nights and lays its great head in her lap, and she still winds her fingers into the fur behind its ear, and it is not silent anymore, my wolf. It sings in the low way that wolves sing, a sound it had not made in 11 years, and she says she can feel it in her chest through her hand, the way a healer feels a heart beating strong under her palm and knows the patient will live. There is a name being carved back into the records of Havil, the one that was struck out with a knife 11 years ago, not to bring back what the fire took, but because Eloin said a house that hides its griefs behind iron never heals them, and a king who cannot bear his own history has no business asking his people to bear theirs. So Aveline's name is in the book again, and my father's, and the roll of all who died behind the barred doors, and once a year we light the great hearth of the hall for them, and we do not look away from the fire. That is the last thing she taught me, and the hardest, and the one I hold most tightly. That iron keeps the world out, but it keeps you in, alone in the cold with your ghosts. And that a wound will not close while there is something in it that wants it kept open. And that the bravest thing a hard man can do is not to run into a fire, but to let someone reach past his iron and lay a warm hand against the worst of him and stay. She asked to see my face, once in a courtyard full of smoke, on the first day, before she knew my name. It took me a marriage, a war's ending, an enemy shamed, and 11 years of iron loosed by 2 sets of hands in a dark corridor to give her the answer. But I gave it. I take it off every night now before I sleep, and she is there, my healer, my hearthlight, the woman who crossed the courtyard, and she looks at the whole of me the way she looked at that locked door on the first day, as though whatever is behind it is hers and worth the opening. And every night in the warm dark of a hold that is not cold anymore, she keeps her word from the very first evening. She tells me what I might if I choose to, and I choose to. Every night for the rest of my life I choose to. The counting stopped the day she came. The living started the day I let her in.